Should old tank water be replaced after some amount of time? Should old tank water be replaced, or can you keep your old salt brine? Your old salt brine, my friends, your old salt brine. We'll run a couple lab tests yet on that old salt brine.
All right.
Welcome. Happy New Year, everyone.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
So, we thought that starting with a new year, starting with fresh salt water, maybe there's some kind of crossover there, some parallel, some sort of theme that we wanted to explore with our episode.
Yeah. We're starting to think about, now that it's a new year, we're putting a little bit of thought into these.
So we had a question around that, which is, short of a known contamination incident, how do I know it's time to dump the tank and start with a fresh solution?
Okay.
So
Dump
the
tank.
old fresh solution with no
swapperoo.
contamination.
The old drain and fill. All right, so
let's start with what we do.
well,
Okay, what, you want to start somewhere else? Fine, I'm not attached to it. I could start anywhere.
let's start with a few things here. So there's
You can't start with a few things. You can start with one thing.
we'll both talk at the same time. All right,
I think that we should...
Okay, so there's a few things to consider with draining your solution. There's the first of all.
How many firsts are you going to have, man?
Okay, all right. Let's break this down. There's really no good research in the float world. There's really no good research in the float world that would lead you to have a specific number of days that you should drain your float tank. It's not like anyone's
number of floats.
Yeah, so that's the other thing, is that really I would probably guess it'd be based more on floats than days. But you usually hear about it in terms of days. But regardless, like floats or days, no one's done a study that said, okay, we had this float tank, we tested it for this long, we drained it here, then we drained it there, and this is what we found, or that's what we found. So if you're hearing things from people in the float industry, including us, people are mostly guessing, right? I mean, it's a lot of like their assumptions based off of this or that, or what feels right to them, or things. So just keep that in mind when you hear these numbers, and you'll hear everything from, I'd say probably once every 6 months is like the lowest I hear. Then you hear a lot of people say once every year, and then you hear some people say never.
Yep. Or every 10 years or something.
Yeah. So all that is based on. There's no like study you're missing out there that kind of breaks this down in a quantifiable way.
And I would say there's actually two reasons that I would say to change your water if there's not an incident or something like that. And the first is because you're concerned about the water quality, or just like combined particles and stuff like that left behind that are too small for the filter to pick up, and you just kind of want to start fresh and have this idea of cleanliness from the new water coming in. And the other reason is totally a marketing one, which is just, it's kind of nice to be able to say that you change out your water every so often, because it's a question you're going to get from a lot of your customers. And I guess for us, at least, like that's why the never option doesn't feel as appealing. Like never changing out our float water means that I have to say that to the customers coming in. Oh no, we never do it. It's just the same that's been in there from 10 years ago. Feels like a weird thing to say,
Right. And there's something nice about, there's still a lot of unanswered questions in the world of float sanitation. So it costs a little extra money to do something like draining it every year, but there's something nice about just having one extra layer of protection, even if it's maybe not doing anything and it's overkill or something like that. It's nice to just be like, okay, well, just in case, like once a year we'll drain this.
It's like my insurance salesman always says, you can't put a price on peace of mind.
In this case, you can. Like it costs about $500 per float tank. But so the other thing to consider with this is that there's churn happening continuously in the float tank, right? So every week or so, you're adding in another inch of water, another 50 pounds of salt, something like that into each of these float tanks. And that's, a 10th, an 11th, a 12th or so of the volume of these float tanks that you're adding in every single week. So you can use that logic to say, okay, well, 12 weeks later, I've replaced the full volume of liquid that was in here to begin with.
But of course not. And it goes out proportionally.
Right. So it doesn't actually really, like, there is a difference between that and totally draining and filling. Like, the way I usually like to think about it is if I were to put, a bunch of food coloring in at the beginning, like 12 weeks later, they would still be food coloring in the solution, right? Because it mixes up every time you add more in there. So it's not exactly the same principle. But it does help. Like adding that fresh stuff in does help. It's not entirely just the same, literally the same liquid that's been in there for 10 years or whatever. And then the other piece of this that I would say is interesting to consider is looking at the pool and spa industry and kind of where that leads you, because it's kind of strange, which is that if you were to say, okay, well, what does like a hot tub do? Commercial hot tubs are typically draining their water like once a week.
Yeah.
Sometimes more often, like really busy ones might even do it daily. And so, and they're basing it off of these levels of turbidity and total dissolved solids and stuff like that, these numbers that they take to figure out what the kind of content of stuff, non-water stuff is in the water. And they replace it when those numbers get too high. And so if you try to just apply that same logic to float tanks, I mean, it becomes the same thing. Like you'd be replacing your float tank water once every few weeks, I think, based off of that logic.
Which sounds a little pricey.
Yeah, I mean, it's just extremely impractical. But it's interesting to consider that that's what the convention is in this kind of, in some ways, analogous industry or analogous device that is like a hot tub. And so at the end of the day, there's a lot of variables to consider, I think, with this, and a lot of unknowns. And kind of where my mind comes to rest with all of this is, okay, so far we've got a pretty good track record with float tanks, right? It's not like you're getting a bunch of people sick or anything coming through your float center. And honestly, like, you should probably be paying more attention to just what the quality of the water in your float tank is, right? Like, your water should never look bad or smell bad. Like if you go in and it's like off-colored or it's smelling weird and
even
it's
like
only
a little
been
bit,
4
opaque
months
or something like that, none of these are good signs.
Like you wouldn't look at that 4 months in and be like, oh, I got 8 more months like before it's the year point and I got to swap this out. Like, no, that's wrong. Like there's something going on. Some part of your system's not working.
And I guess that's a good point. That's not necessarily like an incident or something like specific happened and there was a fecal accident or something like that. But yeah, if anything's getting off about your water, I mean, consider it on that same level of incident. Like that tank needs to be closed down to the public and you need to figure out what's going on until the water is clear and looks and smells right again.
So that's like, I would use those as your guiding star almost more than these specific numbers and stuff like that. And I guess the other thing to throw in is we've gotten our water tested at a lab, at the year mark before we've drained it. And we haven't found any levels of microorganisms in there.
So clearly a year isn't that threshold where everything is going to start going wrong at that point. In fact, it's for me, the year mark is more of an arbitrary marketing thing. Like a year is just a length of time that makes sense to human beings. And I feel like saying a year isn't too long. Like people understand that this is an expensive solution. We have these extensive filtration systems attached to it. So, I mean, I would see no problem operationally right now with pushing our tanks past the year mark. But marketing-wise, I do like keeping that schedule.
And we may find out more stuff in the future. There's a chance that we're wrong about this, and there is quantifiable information that, as we figure it out, could change what people assume is right and isn't. I mean, the bacteriological
have to change
tests,
them every 7 days.
We could.
We don't know.
The bacteriological test is part of it. What your filtration system, the components it has, is a part of it. If you're using something like ozone, that's a more powerful oxidizer than hydrogen peroxide is, and that might lengthen the amount of time before you have these problems. Or if you have a UV system and you have stuff building up in the water, it may look clear, but the small particles could block the UV light from actually being able to properly work. So there's things like that are hard to tell visually and hard to tell through even necessarily like microorganism testing and stuff like that. So there is quantifiable stuff. We just don't exactly have all those pieces of the puzzle put together yet, but we might, as time goes on, get more clarification on this and find out that there is kind of a more specific number of floats that you would be recommending to change your water out in. But even that would probably differ based on your filtration system and the tank and everything.
And I'll say that there's a couple nice things about just being able to drain it anyway, regardless of how often you do it or anything like that. So, with a reservoir system tank where you actually are fully draining the water and stuff like that, this is a little less important. But on the ones where your tank is just sort of one body with a recirculating pump, then when you drain your tank, you actually get to get in there and clean everything and actually, wipe down the bottom and sort of put bleach in there and do this heavier duty disinfection on the tub. And there's the idea that even with a reservoir tank where you're fully draining things out, when you replace the water, empty it, you get to run things through those pipes and actually do a deep clean of your holding tanks and of the pipes and everything like that too. So there's something nice about just, I don't know, it's like doing a routine checkup at the doctor or going in to get your teeth cleaned. Like there is something nice about being able to do this like really extensive deep clean with bleach and with these hardcore chemicals that you can't normally put in a float tank. So yeah, just wanted to toss that out there as another benefit of getting to break things down.
So yeah, that's as far as we know, kind of the general information out there. And as you can see, like the picture is not fully formed, and we'll find out more as more research gets done.
All right, thanks for the question. And if you have more, go to floatanksolutions.com/podcast and shoot them our way.
Talk to you later.
Bye, everyone.